mic. Yeah. All I need is one mic. Yeah. All I need is one mic.
Hey everybody, welcome back to One Mic, where I watch shit so you don't have to. And today I'm here to talk about Chapter 7 of Apple TV's Pachinko. This was a really great episode. I know last week I don't want to say I came down hard on the show, but I pointed out some flaws, that I can see that maybe if things had been done a little bit differently, this show could have been a little bit better, and that it's kind of been on the decline since that really strong episode 4. But I think this episode really did a good job of providing some context and adding a little bit more three-dimensionality to the Kohansu character. I read that this story is unique to the show. He doesn't have this backstory in the books, and this just goes to show you that, last week I talked about how, I don't want to say how easy it is, because that sounds very arrogant of me, but adapting something from, a book or something like that, you already kind of have those bones. So when you want to make your own show or film, you kind of have it already written out for you. You just kind of need to modify it. And I feel like a lot of creators are pretty good at that, and that you could see the struggles with not being able to adapt from that material with the way Game of Thrones ended. But I think this episode is an example of when you excel at adding something into your show or adapting something that's not in the book. Adding in something fresh, adding in something new, and being on your own. The creators of Game of Thrones struggled when they didn't have that material to write the show around. This show, however, took something that's not in the book and created something that's I think was really a really strong episode of television that I think really added to the show. I feel like I have a completely different idea of who Kohansu is and how he ended up being the person that he is in 1932 after watching this episode. So kudos to these writers on this show for being able to, have a book that was so well celebrated and create an entire episode of fresh material that's not even in the book and have it really stand out, I think, to this degree. And speaking of stand out, it is in that classic 4:3 aspect ratio, which I think makes it feel a little more dated, and which I think is an interesting decision just because the show itself is dated. But like I've said, it never really kind of feels like 1932 or 1989. It feels new and fresh. You think about how a show like Winning Time uses these old cameras to give you that 1970s, early 80s feel, where this show doesn't do that. This show is magnificently beautiful all the time. But then this episode, I think, with using that aspect ratio, it did make it feel a little bit more small, a little bit more dated, a little bit more contained, a little bit more intimate. So that was an interesting decision to make. But this episode is set against the 1923 Great Kanto earthquake, I'm not sure how to pronounce it, that happened in Japan, which, again, I didn't know about prior to. Actually, I think I had read that before watching this episode, but either way, it wasn't until this show that I realized that this earthquake happened. But it's an all Kohansu backstory. He's the only character that we know that's in it. And I'm just going to kind of talk about some of the stuff that happened here, what I liked, what I thought they did well, and that'll just be it. So we start out in Yokohama, I put 32, but it's 1923 in my notes. I don't know why I had to tell you what I put in my notes. I could have just not read it. But that's where we start out. Kohansu's father, he seems to be like an accountant or something like that, or a bookie. But whatever it is, he seems to work for some sort of criminal. Maybe he's like a loan shark. Maybe he's in the Yakuza. I don't know. But some fucking criminal guy. And Kohansu is the math tutor for this rich white family where the son is going to be going to Yale. And Kohansu's father introduces him to this big shot guy. His name's Ryochi. He introduced him to this guy, and this guy has heard about how good Kohansu is with math, which we know how good Kohansu is with math because he's kind of been celebrated for that on the show up to this point, his business acumen. But he heard how good Kohansu is, and he offers him a job running one of his businesses. And the father's like, no, I don't want my son having that kind of life. He's already got a good deal with a rich white American family. I think I want him to stay in that lane and not get into the shady business lane. But interestingly enough, right before that scene ends, Ryochi's walking away, and he goes to Kohatsu, and he says his Japanese is good, but he needs to learn to do more if he wants to be accepted as one of them. And I thought that was an interesting line, because like, joke's on you, Kohatsu, you're never going to be accepted as one of them. Like, if there's one takeaway I can take away from this show, is how shitty the Japanese people treat Koreans, because they will not let us forget that for 1 second. And that's 1923. We know in 1932, ain't shit got even a little bit better. So I just thought that was interesting. Like, there's nothing he can do to actually be considered one of them. And then they completely forego the opening theme music and all that. And they just show the title of the episode, which I think, again, sets you up for what is going to be a fairly dreary episode. The show is generally dreary, but I think that's what makes the opening credits so fun, is that they're so lively and you're seeing these characters in a way you wouldn't see them before. But I do think it would have been kind of weird to see that and then go to where this episode goes to afterwards. So interesting decision, but I think maybe a good one to not have the opening dance the opening dance number before they massacre 100,000 people. So we do spend a little bit of time seeing the relationship that Kohatsu and his father have. It's like a very wholesome one. It's very counter to the relationship that I think Ryochi would have with Kohatsu, or is going to have with Kohatsu, as we see by the end of this episode. And the relationship is very good between them. They seem dedicated to one another, but his father really doesn't want him to get into the life that he has. He wants Kohatsu to go to America, go to Yale with this white family. That's what they want to do, and that's what his father wants him to do, but he's hesitant to leave his father. But their relationship becomes strained when Kohatsu overhears that his father stole some money from Ryochi in order to give it to some chick. And they go to ask the girl for the money back, and she's like, yeah, I gave it to this other guy. I ain't never gonna get that back. That's just how he is. Like, so, like, Kohatsu's father was completely fleeced out of his money by a woman who, I don't know if she's like a prostitute or if it's just some woman that he's just enamored with. But whatever it was, it sounded like there was probably some pillow talk, and she's like, yeah, I sure could use 200 yen. And he's like, I got you. And then goes and steals the money just for her to give the 200 yen to somebody else. Like, the whole intention was to play him to get the money to give to another guy. And that's gotta hurt. But Cole berates his dad for doing something like that. He's like, how could you do that? He's like, well, you ain't never been in love. You're not gonna understand. He's like, I could never do anything like that. And I thought that was a good line too, because when I talk about how this episode kind of provides a little more context to who Kohatsu is and makes him a more three-dimensional character, that's the kind of line that lets you know. That not lets you know, but that serves that point, because think about the Kohatsu we've seen in 1932 and how he treats women. So, like, when you relate that to what he experienced and how all of this kind of stemmed from his father essentially getting fleeced out of money by this woman, it just makes a little bit more sense how he is with women as he gets older, especially once he starts being around this Ryochi guy. He's probably not going to be getting the best advice on women in that regard either. But I don't know if we're ever even going to see that. This is such a departure from the rest of the show, and the next episode is the finale, so they've got to put us back into our regular timelines. We might not see that. But I would be interested in seeing, like, if they did like another episode, which they're not, but if they did do another episode or something, like seeing the Kohatsu and Ryochi storyline between 1923 and 1932, I'd watch that. But after he berates his dad over getting fleeced by this lady, they physically fight, and the father tells him to go with the white family to America. I think they're called the Holmeses. So Kohatsu offers to take the job that was offered to him at the beginning of the episode from Ryochi. He offers to take the job in order to pay off his father's debt. And it sounds like Ryochi's prepared to kill his father, because he's like, for your honor, you owe a debt. Like, how would it look if you stole from me and I'll let you get away with it? So it looks like he's going to kill his father, but then that's when the earthquake happens. The dad dies predictably in the earthquake. Like, once I realized what was going on, that this was the earthquake episode, and they were showing us how much of a kind and loving relationship the two of them had, I thought initially I thought he was going to go to America and miss the earthquake altogether, and his dad was gonna die in the earthquake. But then there was like a scene where they were like talking outside of a baseball stadium. I'm like, nah, he's probably gonna die soon. And sure enough, he does die in the earthquake fairly predictably. But Ryochi tells him to honor his father by going to America, which Kohatsu intends to do. And he goes back to the Holmes house, and they're packing up this cart that they're gonna take to the water where their father is waiting for them to leave. And Kohatsu tells him, like, you can't go that way. The roads are all messed up. And they go it on foot. And they're going on foot. They get separated. There's a ton of dust, a ton of dirt. You can't see. Kohatsu gets hit with like an explosion that knocks out his hearing for a minute. His ears are ringing. He's completely lost. No idea what's going on. He loses the woman and the son. But eventually he runs into Ryochi again. And while they're walking, there's a nice shot of them walking. There's a lot of nice shots in this episode. I'm going to talk about them a little bit at the end. But they're like walking like with lanterns and stuff like that. And they come across the woman and the son dead in like it looked like kind of like some sort of cart or something like that they might have been laying on. And he digs into the son's pocket and pulls out the watch that the same watch that he eventually ends up giving to Sunja. So they gave like the watch a backstory too, which I think is interesting because all I could think of is, and if you haven't seen this, you're not going to get it, but that watch has been on like a tumultuous journey that is like akin to the journey that the watch from Pulp Fiction went on. Christopher Walken, the watch that he gives to Bruce Willis's character, that whole story, if you've seen that scene, like that watch, these two watches have been on a journey. I just thought it was interesting they gave a watch a backstory. And then they come across a barn where there's this old guy outside and there's these 4 Koreans out that are trying to have a conversation with him. And we learned earlier in the episode that the earthquake kind of like, I guess, destroyed a prison enough that a bunch of Korean prisoners were able to escape. And these Japanese like vigilantes, they like straight up torches and pitchforks kind of deal, are on the hunt, and they're kind of using this as an excuse to attack Koreans. So this barn owner, he can't communicate with them because he's speaking Japanese, they're speaking Korean. Kohatsu comes up, translates for him, and he tells them to go hide in a bar. The vigilantes arrive, and they ask, essentially where these guys are. And in order to kind of like help sell the lie, the owner of this place, he jumps right in with a little bit of racism himself as well. And he's like, yeah, I saw the motherfuckers. They went that way. And he points in the wrong direction. But they see the barn anyway. And in what is a really fucking crazy scene, at nighttime, they burn this barn down with these guys alive in there. And it's a pretty fucking sick scene. And Kohatsu, who is also hiding inside this cart, watches it in between like the slats. And yeah, it's a crazy fucking scene, man. Really, really good stuff. But after this scene is over, they leave. They come across Ryochi's family, and essentially Ryochi tells them that he's gonna take Kohatsu in and he's gonna work off the debt that his dad made. And that's the end of the episode. And like I said, like I've been saying this whole time, I thought this was a great episode. I really liked getting that context into who he was. Helps me understand not just how he treats women, but how he approaches business. Like when he was like being raised by his father, who was, kind of just willing to go along with the flow, stealing money for women, just kind of like subjugated to just like, I'm just going to live in this kind of like, this miserable sort of life. And now he's here with Ryochi, who is someone who's powerful and who has money and who has influence. And what do we see in Kohatsu right now? That same kind of identity, the power, the money, the influence. And it's interesting to think that like now this guy that we see, we can look at it like he might have been raised by his father, but he became the man he is from presumably being raised by Ryochi. And then we get the watch and all this other cool stuff. So really good episode. Great visuals. I thought there were a lot of great shots in this one. I love the opening shot of Yokohama after it's like he's walking through the streets and the camera just pulls out and you can see like this whole town. It's really nice. There was a great shot of the white family's house that he was staying in, the homes, where the camera kind of like loops around and you can just see not just the size of the house, but like just the setting that it's in and everything around it, all the foliage and the trees and all that good stuff. And there's multiple great shots of post-earthquake devastation as well. So beautiful episode to look at. And then I also really like, there's a moment within like a 5-minute span where Kohatsu speaks like 3 different languages. He speaks English, Korean, and Japanese within like a 5-minute span. And I just love the fact that there are so many shows, well, I can't say so many, but multiple shows right now where people are learning languages for this show. Like, I doubt Kohatsu knows English, that actor, but he probably learned the English that he needed to learn to say on this show. Then you got Tokyo Vice, where you got Ansel Elgort doing great Japanese. Apparently he learned Japanese for the show as well. Interesting how there's 2 different shows that both feature primarily large Japanese cast. You still got to throw a white person in every now and then, but yeah, it was kind of note the white family in this episode, and then noting anytime like a white person shows up in Tokyo Vice. It's interesting, but that speaks to how authentic they're trying to keep the show, to where when you see a white person, you're just like, oh shit, there's a white person here. Where you think about every other thing we watch in life, it's hard to find anyone who's not white. So it's interesting that these shows have been so loyal to making sure that you feel immersed in Japan or in Korea or whatever, to the point where it's actually jarring to see white folks. But yeah, great episode. I'm looking forward to the finale next week. And until then, peace.